I just wanted to put a quick note out there before this week's episode. My guest this week is kathrynwalker, a CRNA who is also the CEO of Revitalist Lifestyle and Wellness. Our conversation ran a little longer than usual, so I just decided to split it into two episodes. Part one focuses on how Katie was drawn to mental health and how she developed the skill sets that ultimately helped her to open her own ketamine clinic. Enjoy. Welcome to the Plan B CRNA podcast. I'm your host, Bobby Jones, and I'm so excited that you're here. The Plan B CRNA podcast is the only show made specifically for nurse anesthetists who are exploring options outside of their traditional career paths. This is the place to expand your mind and your goals as we uncover new ways to produce side income together. Join me for some honest, unscripted discussions with other CRNAs who are transforming their financial lives. This episode is brought to you by On-Call Capital. On-Call Capital is dedicated to educating CRNAs and other healthcare providers about investing outside of the traditional stock market. On-Call Capital also provides opportunities for you, yes, you, to create passive income and generational wealth while also lowering your taxable income through investments in the apartment and alternative investment spaces. If you haven't hit subscribe yet, make sure you do that right now so that you don't miss an episode. Thanks so much for joining me today. And now, on with the show. Welcome to another episode of the Plan B CRNA podcast. Today, I'm joined by a CRNA who's truly disrupting healthcare as we know it by providing cutting-edge treatments for mental health throughout the eastern half of the country. kathrynwalker is the CEO of Revitalist Lifestyle and Wellness, which serves as a publicly traded company on the Canadian Securities Exchange. She's one of few entrepreneurial females that are in the publicly traded space of psychedelics. Now, Katie worked first at a level 1 trauma center in Tennessee for 9 years before attending anesthesia school at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. She practiced anesthesia of all specialties for 8 years before opening the first Revitalist location in Knoxville, Tennessee. Today, Katie operates as a leading advocate for CRNA-led businesses as she continues to advance her comprehensive skill set by pursuing her advanced degree in psychiatric nursing. Katie, I'm so excited to have you here today.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So, mental health is a much more popular topic of conversation nowadays with the pandemic and everything going on. But it hasn't always been that way. So when and how did you really begin to think about mental health in your role as a provider?
That's always an interesting question that gets asked a lot. And I was, like you mentioned, I was pretty comprehensive in the hospital settings, and I ran across some articles for ketamine back in 2015, 2016. And honestly, when I read those, I was captivated, right, to see the difference in this and like mental health, as we all know it, kind of, sort of, some of us are transitioning much more quickly than others, but mental health, it was such a broad category that, we were told not to talk about it. Even as providers, you send them to a psychiatrist or you tell them to go to the ER or call 911. And that was really the thought process of it. Even if somebody killed themselves, don't talk about it because there may be a chain reaction of other people that would kill themselves. And really, when I ran across these articles, I ended up being mesmerized by it. I actually spoke to a psychiatrist. I would do some anesthesia for ECT. And spoke to her, and she said, it's probably a fad. There's a lot of fads in psychiatry. So again, that kind of made me want to dig in deeper. So then I started looking, I'm like, wait a minute, Yale, Johns Hopkins, Oxford, this is real. Like there's something big here going on. Once I started seeing mental health was much more than any of us knew, meaning that there's neurologic components, there's psychiatric components, there's autoimmune components, inflammation, right? So it hurt me. I guess we opened up in 2018 in Knoxville. There's a difference in like, hey, I want to help because I think this is great. I've got a great skill set. I have empathy. There's a difference in going out to the world and doing that versus going out to the world, starting that, and then seeing how broken the system was. Mm-hmm. So when I started that, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, this is almost like an outpatient ICU, because these people have been going, not for a year or two, these people have been going for decades to try to get the help that they desperately needed. They've relied on every provider out there. Some of these individuals have 5 to 9 specialists, right? So we go back to the ICU when you got everybody on this caseload. But the thing about having specialists in the outpatient world, none of them talk, right? So they don't have this common bridge that someone in the ICU may have by having an intensive care nurse who helps to pull all the specialties together to make sense of the whole. That's what we want revitalists to do, right? Because we know how it operates in the hospital. In the outpatient world, other providers don't always listen to other providers. So I thought therapists and psychiatrists spoke. That's not common practice. Wow. So the neat thing about us as CRNAs, we worked with every specialty out there. We can empathize. Sometimes I do have to close my eyes to try to understand different thought process because it is just so different. Like I had no idea. Acupuncturists, they're brilliant. Had no idea, you know, and then they go back, they get their doctorate, right? In acupuncture medicine.
Wow.
You know, so it's all these things in the hospital world. We're like, oh yeah, we know everything. I'm telling you, you get out here, you start speaking to acupuncturists, therapists, like they're all trained in a very similar manner, but it's completely different. And if we can't open our eyes up in the medical world to understand this, or at least consider it in our practice, we're hurting everyone.
Wow. That's there's a lot to unpack there. So
loaded question,
that is so cool. I love that answer though, because it is, you know, so much of this is all encompassing. So you look at a problem like that is so global, and yet you're living in, you know, you were living in Knoxville at the time, right? When you're going through this, and so you decided to open up your own clinic. That's not easy in and of itself. But you said, okay, well, I can at least help the people here in this space. So, you know, that's not an easy thing. So what was it like doing that without an instruction manual? And you know, what were the challenges you faced? Financial, regulatory, all that kind of stuff. What's the red tape look like?
That's something, you know, I don't like weaknesses, right? I always like to strengths. And that's what I do with this company is anytime with their weakness, we just make sure that we have like the best roster on the team kind of to cover all the bases. But yeah, I mean, when you step into it, right, it's just so different. And this is something I talked at the Florida Association of Nurse Anesthetists. When you step into this world, first off, I was scared to death stepping out of the hospital because I knew the regulations there. I mean, fortunately, I was in the hospital system for about 17 years before I came out to the outpatient world. I knew JACO, knew all the regulations. I was, you know, shift lead, everything, all those guys to where I understood that. So what I did, you know, is I hired a medical business consultant initially and said, what do I need to do? And he gave me a list of 500 bullet points, you know, to consider. So, you know, he's like, well, you start here. So you started there, and then, you know, it's understanding. And I think that's a big piece that a lot of providers don't understand is, you know, nursing, medical, whomever, all these associations that are out there, the AANA, the ASA, AMA, all those guys, those are political associations, right? So we call them for advice, expecting they can give it to us, and they can't because they're not a legally binding body. They're just politics. So even though they lead a lot of these arguments that we see, especially with individuals terrorizing, you know, everything, when we see these and we want to reach out to them and ask for help, they can't give any direct advice. So, you know, that was really disheartening to me because I just didn't know. And they're like, well, go talk to your healthcare lawyer. So I think understanding the system as a whole, but very superficially, is the way that people would start to open a clinic. You can't be stuck on one thing, but you expect that you've got to get it started, and then to find those hands of wisdom that know how to come in and help to direct you. So you don't just walk into a lawyer's office and say, I want to open a ketamine clinic. You'll go broke, right? I mean, you got to go in with some type of argumentative or material that supports your stance. So to hire a business consultant and then, have those 500 bullet points, have material with it, then you go into the lawyer and you get their blessing of like, okay, it looks like you're trying to abide by the law. That's what I would recommend to people that want to start to open clinics like these.
Okay. So then, and after you got started, you said you opened your first one in 2018. How long did it take for you to realize that this was just going to end up being much bigger than one clinic?
You know what? It grew at such a rapid speed. I still don't know what it's all going to turn into, right? My vision now is globally, right? We actually have people globally who reach out to us. I mean, I just had calls with Ireland and Israel just recently, because we're not the only ones experiencing this epidemic. It's the entire world. So people will hear this who have started businesses, process and development, and getting the momentum is horrible. It's hard. It's tiring. You constantly feel like a failure. You're in the trenches. It's those pieces. So, that's part of it. And you just keep going, right? So what's the difference between somebody who fails and someone who succeeds? The person who succeeds gets up the next day. So it's knowing that you're going to be in the trenches and it's going to take a second. But a lot of the providers that are out there's like 1,000 ketamine clinics out there right now. A lot of those providers that feel like they still may be in the trenches, or they've jumped exponentially to where like, okay, well, now how do I restructure my business? You have to constantly pivot and shift because these clinics are meeting the demand that's out there. It's the fact of the matter, we don't have the supply yet. So honestly, it doesn't really matter what gets thrown my way, because I know what we're doing is we're evolving the mold that needs to happen. So with individuals that even have these clinics already open, they've got to be aware of their own mental health and compassion fatigue. So, if they feel like you have nothing left to give, but you know that these people, if they're not there, they may go kill themselves. That's when you need to start looking at, okay, how can we come together to help create this initiative further? So, there's just a lot of different pieces to consider for everybody in this spectrum.
Now, I guess, kind of piggybacking on that, you mentioned compassion fatigue and that's something that we're hearing a lot about in the hospitals. But I think it's interesting that you mentioned that for these kinds of clinics as well. I'd love it if you could go a little more into that, just because I'm thinking to myself, well, yeah, you've got your own business, you're kind of controlling things, but sure. I mean, I have my own business and it's been a real grind the last, year and a half. And so I can completely understand that feeling of like, well, people are depending on me and I've got to be able to do this. What is that like on the clinic side versus in the hospital setting? Is there just more empathy in the clinic setting than you can find in the hospital sometimes?
You're right. Those are all great questions.
Sorry, that was like 5 questions in one.
No, you're good. Yeah, no, I think I've got them categorized. We don't know how good we have it in the hospital. Okay. So we're like 99.9% effective in anesthesia. We do a heck of a job. We get what needs to be done and we can walk away, right? Because we know we took the best care of our patients for that day. We knew they came into us with some type of ailment, maybe it is just a TNA, or maybe it's, a craniotomy. So, so there's a difference when they walk in and if they have like a glioblastoma and you're doing a craniotomy on them, and you do a good anesthetic, you walk away knowing that more than likely these, their end of life, is it's there, right? I mean, you're not walking away because physically we see that tumor up on the screen, when they're trying to dissect it out. The difference here is a healthy person walks into you and there's nothing wrong with them from the outside, but you go and you sit down with these people and they've been on antidepressants since 1982, or they've tried to hang themselves 3 times, or they've been raped, for 2 years by a dad or a brother or an uncle. All this stuff it hits you, right? It hits you hard. Even coming from an ICU background, we're going to level 1 trauma. I mean, we saw everything, right? I mean, we get such thick skin, especially anesthesia providers. There's a difference in knowing diagnostically that someone's an organ failure versus someone walking in you think's healthy, whose brain may be at its latter stages. So the skill set that we have as critical care providers, and this is what a lot of people don't understand with ICU nurses. With ICU nurses, because I've been told several times, because I've spoke on several different levels trying to help to bring this to the surface for even, state departments and such. And I've been told several times, you don't have any mental health experience. What mental health experience do you have? And the first time I was told that, I couldn't verbalize why I did have experience. But then now I go back and I'm like, okay, so when we're taking people off of a ventilator, and, say it's an 18-year-old who had a completed attempt basically at hanging themselves and they're brain dead. And we're taking them off that ventilator. We know they're brain dead, but their heart, their body looks beautiful. You've got their parents and their sisters and their brothers sitting next to them. And we're the ones who are taking them off the vent with the respiratory therapist there. There's no psychiatrist. There's no psychologist. There's no chaplain. We're the one who is there. And what happens is, we take them off the ventilator, right? And this, other people may not know. But you take them off the ventilator, they're brain dead, right? But they still have some capacity to have a reflex to where they breathe or they gurgle, or what they call it the death, the death gurgle or whatever it is, to where they start choking on their secretions. Yeah. And honestly, if you don't understand the physiology behind that, knowing that person has no recall of any of this going on, the family members that are watching, because they'll want to stay by their side, family members that are watching that's so traumatic to family members. And they'll go on the rest of their lives thinking they made the wrong decision by taking them off the ventilator because their family member sat there and choked themselves to death. Mm-hmm. Whereas we know the brain was gone. There's nothing there. It's just a body. It's a shell, kind of thing. So to say that nurses don't know anything about mental health shows a very archaic system that's out there that's very, judgmental, right? So therefore they make this its own kind of territory to where it's like, no, you have to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist to do this because they're the only ones that know mental health.
Yeah.
They don't know the system they're working with. It's like, let's get these people in the shoes of a nurse for one day, especially with COVID, where they're having to take people off the vent when they're on iPads. Mm-hmm. Let's take them in for one day and it will blow their minds. And then it will make sense. Why do we have a physician shortage, a nursing shortage? Why does nobody want to do these jobs? They're hard and it's destroying people's souls. So knowing that situation, bringing this to the clinics, there has to be some type of bridge. So, in the hospital, we can walk away. We know we do a good job. In this situation with these clinics, there's a lot of support that's going to be needed for these clinicians because mental health isn't always beautiful, right? We want to make it beautiful, especially with psychedelics. It's very promising, and I hope that we can be so preventative at using psychedelics. But right now, we've got people who've been struggling for 40 years, and we know what's going to work. They're going to bring their 40-year-old story there. So that's the part of the compassion fatigue that I see the most. Whereas I think CRNAs coming from an intensive care background and being around so much, we've been around so much death. It came so normal to us. We've talked to families. So knowing that is a big, big piece there to where when you open these, one, you got to consider that. Two, you also have to, the nice thing, like with our clinic specifically with Revitalist, we have therapists that work with every client. Because sometimes, even though we can deal with a lot as CRNAs, sometimes it's just nice to be able to say, can you help more with this? Because I think you would be a better person than I. Or it's the same way when the therapist comes to us and says, hey, they feel like they have more medical questions that I can't answer. Can you help them here? So it's that team approach, right? It's like an anesthesia in the hospital. We walk away, we drop them off and pack you. We walk away. We've done a good job. Same way with the therapist piece, to where we can cut it off, just cut it off. So that's one piece to the question. The additional piece to the question is, with these businesses, when you open a business, you expect there's going to be troubleshooting, all these other things. It's a part of a business, right? The process of development, again, horrible, hate it. But you have to expect failure and just keep shifting and shifting and shifting and shifting. When you open these clinics, not only are you opening a new business in the time of a pandemic and an opioid crisis and a mental health crisis, you're also taking on the problems of these people walking into the door. So you're taking on 200% of the load, as to where a normal business, if I went out and sold t-shirts, I would have my own, kind of t-shirt problems. But no, I'm taking on the problems of a 12-year-old child who's tried to hang herself 3 times and the parents are crying next to me. So it's that piece that people need to understand before they come into this world. And that's really why I'm trying to bring all these specialties together as a team, because as a team, we can do it, but we've got to take care of each other.
Yeah, you can't pour from an empty glass. I mean, that's something that I experienced in my own career, and so that perfect segue into the next thing I was going to bring up is, obviously, nurses, CRNAs are well suited to come into this type of a field. How do you go about finding the rest of your team members who help you to build this company and to build these clinics specifically? How do you select the team members that are coming along with you?
It's one of the things. So I actually have a chief development officer. He's in Jacksonville, Florida. He's a nurse anesthetist as well, has his doctorate. But he actually helps with the conversations now. It used to be just me starting out, but it's one of those things, right? When you have this conversation, okay, this is what we're doing. And if somebody says, well, how about, can I get 10 weeks of vacation because they're offering 10 weeks over here in Illinois and they're paying $400,000? No, as a new business, you can't really offer 10 weeks of vacation and pay $400,000. You can, but you expect that your break evens are going to be about in 6 years. And then also you're not going to have anybody that wants to support your company, because it's, it just takes a second. So, I think the talking to the people that understand this, that want something new, something different, something challenging, who want to create change, who are purpose-driven, who understand that financially, yes, it will happen. I mean, we bring CRNAs in, on a comparative level of what the hospitals are paying, but then they have to also understand we're not contractors in this business. We're actually involved and, we're invested. This is ours, kind of thing. And so I tell everybody this: listen, guys, when you all come in, you guys are on the pillar. We're making an enterprise, right? So it's those people who want to come in, who want to be more, want to be something part of bigger than themselves, but it's going against that anesthesia. Because in the nursing world, when we were in the ICU, I was on boards or whatever else. I was associated with the hospital. Yeah. But most groups were not owned by hospitals, right? So we're hourly. How much are you going to pay me hourly? Unfortunately, and I don't want to be, I don't want to take this negatively by any means with CRNAs, but the system has conditioned us to be so short-sighted with hourly pay. We're not always seeing the long run of like, hey, this is a public company that's worth anywhere between $30 million to $50 million a day. You're on the bottom part of this. They're expecting we're going to be $1 billion market with profit sharing and 401ks, and we're putting you in to help create it. So not every CRNA wants that, and that's okay, but some do. So that's the piece. And when we recruit these people, it's like, how do you want to be involved? Right.
Yeah.
How would you feel about going to London and helping to open a clinic there because we have interest there? And some people are like, oh, I would love that. Other people are like, no, I like my time. I want to be off. I just want to do, 8 to 2. I want to do more surgery center, cush jobs, plastics or whatever else. And that's okay. But this is not that, right? I mean, are we going to be compensated more so than we are right now in the hospital? Absolutely, because we have a value that other people don't have. They don't have it, and so, but you can't create an empire in a day, right? Let's go back to Rome. But that's what we're doing is we're creating an empire to where people are hearing us all over the world right now. Yeah. And it's not going to stop. The more meetings I get in, the more I hear, oh, you don't understand that. So it's a piece that CRNAs, we understand, we get it, and then we're bringing in, we've got emergency room physicians. We just acquired a clinic in Virginia with an emergency room physician who's like, let's just get together and push this initiative forward. Anesthesiologist actually in North Carolina, he's like, I basically got let go of my job in the hospital. I got to choose, right? Stay in the hospital or open the clinic. That I couldn't do both. So I opened the clinic. So it put a fire under me I'm going to make this succeed. So I actually spoke to an anesthesiologist 2 weeks ago in North Carolina. Same thing. His group turned his back on him and said, you go do your voodoo medicine and we'll be here doing real medicine. So, so there's this, there's much more of a comprehensive molding between us that the politics don't always give that impression. So if we can bring all these people together, we've got a neurosurgeon who does endo as well as open procedures. He's like, let's go, let's do this. I'm ready to leave the hospital when you're ready for me to be on board. You don't find people like that, right? So it's just really figuring out who are we going to take and make sure we have every weakness covered. Who are we going to take to push this ship forward?
Well, it's very much a mindset. It is an entrepreneurial mindset, and not everybody has that, but CRNAs in particular are often very well equipped to have that type of a mindset. I appreciate Katie's journey in healthcare. It mirrors that of so many providers out there who really just want to help their patients, but they don't always feel like the current settings that they're in allow them to do so. Katie found her solution by opening her own ketamine clinic and helping others to share in that journey of systematizing what Revitalist ultimately does and how they do it. Well, that's going to do it for this episode. I've placed Katie's contact info in the show notes, so make sure you check that out. And also join me next week for part 2 as we discuss what it's like to go public with a company, talk to investors, add teammates, and scale up. We'll see you next time. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Plan B CRNA podcast. If you haven't already subscribed and reviewed the show, I'd be honored if you took the extra time. It really helps to expand our reach and get the word out about the show. If you're a CRNA who is interested in sharing your story on our podcast, I'd love to have you. Please email me at bobby@oncallinvestments.com for more information. This episode was brought to you by On-Call Capital. They are dedicated to helping providers like you develop passive income and generational wealth through investments in the apartment and alternative investment spaces. Feel free to check out their website at www.oncallinvestments.com and subscribe to their free educational email series. You can find On-Call Capital on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also check out our YouTube page, where you'll find all of the show episodes along with other educational videos. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.